Well, for more on this, I'm joined from California by the political analyst Peter Mathews. Peter, good to see you. It's been a whirlwind couple of weeks for the Trump administration, hasn't it? What is the feeling at home over the president's achievements?
Well, I think things are really moving, and let's see if they're in the right direction and if he can be calm enough to make sure he sees things through and hopefully doesn't get really upset at Kim Jong-un and jettison the summit. I think that otherwise things could work out well. The main sticking point will be whether or not North Korea will be able to or will be willing to dismantle its nuclear arsenal and missile system, which is exactly what Trump wants. But North Korea is not ready to do that yet. They just want to freeze the development of their nuclear missiles, and then have them still in place while they're negotiating other things, such as a peace treaty, which is one thing they want.
Interesting you mentioned about North Korea's intentions to freeze the nuclear plans at the moment. What do you think, Peter, this gesture of goodwill, as the Trump administration calls it, will do for that upcoming meeting between Trump and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un?
The goodwill by releasing the three prisoners or detainees is very important, right? Because it's not only real for them, but it's symbolic for the whole process that North Korea is willing to negotiate and willing to give in certain things to the United States and to the world. And it shows them paints them more on a humane basis. And I think it's just a good sign. And I think it's a good way to start the movement toward the summit that's coming up in just weeks. You couldn't go wrong with them doing that, actually.
And Peter, is it fair that Donald Trump takes the credit for this release? We heard that Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, had a significant hand in it. Two of the Americans as well were indeed detained after President Trump was elected.
That's correct. So we should take note of that. And there's enough credit to go around, and I believe that we shouldn't be, or they shouldn't be, the Trump administration, taking claim just for themselves and credit for themselves. They should be more magnanimous and give credit to not only Chinese leader, but also the South Korean president, President Moon, who had a major hand with his meeting with Kim Jong-il, the North Korean leader, and meeting the DMZ, for example, what it was accomplished there. I believe the South Koreans have a lot of credit should be given them. And Mr. Trump can be magnanimous and seem more like a real world leader and a diplomat and set the better mood if he would do that instead of claiming credit just for himself.
And how much of this release is being, trumpeted essentially to the world in order to perhaps distract from the diplomatic fallout from the US pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, Peter?
It was huge pulling out of the nuclear deal. It went against almost all of the major countries in the world who advised President Trump to stay in the deal because it did stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons right within the next several years and put us on a good path to continuing trade with them and détente. And I think it's a contradiction for President Trump to be pursuing détente with North Korea at the same time he's jettisoning the possible détente with Iran. And it can have a negative effect on the North Korean discussions. North Korea can feel like if Iran couldn't trust President Trump to hold on to the word of the American government under President Obama, then how can they trust him when it comes to his word, when it comes to North Korean negotiations? It's a very tricky situation. I think President Trump would have been better served had he left the Iran nuclear deal in place, as all of our allies had urged him to do so, including Britain, France, and Germany. I think he ignored a lot of good advice on that Iran deal, and could be problematic now.
And how significant do you think that South Korea's role within this diplomatic, I guess you could say, calming, will play in the future, do you think?
I think it will play a major role because, after all, South Korea is the country that's the most affected, other than North Korea, with this situation. And if the South and North can come together and sign a peace treaty with the United States and the UN and get this Korean War behind them, then the two Koreas can work possibly towards some form of cooperation economically. Don't forget that Kim Jong-un has just stated that since he's got his nuclear arsenal in place, he doesn't need any more bombs, doesn't need to build any more, or test anymore. What he wants to do now is focus exclusively on economic development. He made that very specifically clear. And the reason that he said that is because he wants to show the world that that's what he's about. And guess who's better positioned to help him with economic development? The South Korean Republic of South Korea.
Moving on to the Iran nuclear fallout, Peter, do you think that there's perhaps a division that we're seeing between Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel on one side and the Europeans on the other, who perhaps want to see a thaw and more of a diplomatic process engaged there?
Absolutely, and that's the real tragedy, because the U.S. and Israel have been recalcitrant about this in the form of Trump, not Obama. Obama was right on board with the European Union and Russia and China, the six-party talks. This is a very big divide now, and it's going to cause a fission, complete fissure between, or rather a big fissure in terms of trade and diplomatic relations with the United States and the European Union, which is a real tragedy and danger because those are our closest allies. So I think this is a very tragic situation that Trump has brought us into by by listening to Netanyahu's advice and his own proclivities to say, let's just call off the Iran nuclear deal. And he made that decision based on many false assumptions. Iran had not violated the deal. In fact, the IAEA, United Nations agency, said they were in compliance completely with inspections, and inspectors were on the ground to make sure Iran was not building nuclear parts, nuclear bombs, or even starting up its program to do that. Iran had to give up 97% of its enriched uranium, and it did that, and it's doing a lot of other things, like giving up its centrifuges, about 15,000 centrifuges. All that was showing that Iran was serious about focusing on economic development and bringing back trade and getting rid of the sanctions and giving up their nuclear program at least for several years, at least 10 years for that. And that was too bad that Trump threw that out the window at this time.
Peter Mathews, political analyst from California, thank you very much indeed for joining us.